All right, we got an email from Nick in Massachusetts. I'm becoming more and more concerned lately that playing old games is something that is eventually going to be phased out. With the rumors that the next generation consoles will not play used games, and even with current titles like Diablo 3 requiring you to connect to a server, even to play single player, it seems like in 10 to 20 years, those games will no longer be playable at all. This is a big concern to me because approximately 50% of my gaming time is spent replaying older titles rather than buying new ones. It's really nice to me that I can just take my Diablo 2 disc out of the box and play it whenever I want, but eventually I won't be able to do that with Diablo 3. Do you consider this a major problem? And if so, how do you suppose it can be fixed?
I don't even know so much a matter of not being able to play those games as just having those games resold to you over and over and over again, depending on what the technology is that's new.
Right. Yeah, HD remakes and digital download versions of it.
Diablo's different though. Like that's a certain. Like
different
at one point, a lot of that content isn't stored locally.
Right.
You have to fundamentally change the structure of the game to support the servers going offline for something like that.
And then,
also, those servers will probably be online for a very long time.
Yes,
it's going to have to come down to a company by company, sort of solution.
We start thinking
Valve,
about.
Well, Valve has been out there. There's a term for it. I forget what it is, but Valve has been out there saying, yes, we will do this in the event that, we collapse or something happens with Steam.
Right.
We will issue whatever this thing is. We'll make it so that all those games you bought, you can have and play even after the end of the Steam service. But I don't know if every company would be that generous about that kind of thing.
I wouldn't call that generosity.
That's doing right. That's doing right by your customer.
It's comparatively
What I'm saying
generous,
is that's going beyond the requirements of the law, probably.
Yeah.
I bet a lot of companies' asses are thoroughly covered by their legalese.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's why they can take down the Madden servers 2 years after, the game ships or
when stuff like that started happening, or just the ubiquity of online passes or DLC, when that started becoming more of a thing, you start having to ask these questions about in the future, how would you will it even be possible to recreate that experience?
Yeah, well, you go back to the Xbox One, you can't play any of those games online anymore.
Yeah.
You could set up an elaborate tunneling software so the games with system link support you could still play. But even that's
is it
ridiculous for most people, and it's.
At a certain point, does it become presumptuous on the player's behalf that it would have this kind of infinite shelf life for the material?
I don't know, presumptuous, but it's damaging to the medium long term. That the way we games are distributed, unlike other forms of media, at some point it will become difficult to go back and play the history of the medium, or to play it in the form that other people enjoyed it in. And that games there's been a couple of articles recently about this, but about the problems of preservation in video games is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
I got a room full of bullshit. I'm trying to preserve video games.
It's way more
sucks.
complicated.
It's a pain in the ass.
You're right, because of you're rendering the actual material on different architecture from one system to the next, and being able to recreate even that experience, or emulate it, and what that,
look at Saturn.
What that takes.
Years out there still have not figured out that machine.
There's a pretty good Saturn emulator on the PC.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot better, but even then, it's it's not like you got to jump through a lot of hoops.
Yep.
And I hope at some point that gets. At some point there's some sort of solution to that. It seems hard to figure out how there is a comprehensive solution to that, because until there is some sort of standardization of
and
technology.
it really is one of the beautiful things about the community that formed around emulation, and it's not necessarily the same as it was back when there were a lot of interesting breakthroughs happening all the time with all these different machines. But the rise of MAME and the rise of Game Boy emulation and stuff, and it's easy to look at it just from the piracy angle and go oh man, there were people downloading Pokemon for Game Boy in droves and not buying the cartridges or whatever. But just from that preservation angle, being able to access that material and have most of it run pretty correctly on a PC is awesome. And you would wish that companies would find a way to make that stuff work from a business perspective, just from that preservation angle of just give people access to these old games. If you're not gonna, and as we get further and further along, and it's harder and harder to play those games in their original forms, whether it's servers going offline or in the case of the Xbox or something, this need to find a way to make that work from a business perspective.
That's what I've always admired about Nintendo is that they do seem to, I don't think they go far enough. Like, I'd still love like a Nintendo subscription service.
Totally.
But they do seem to, as a company, to recognize legacy. Like they take that from one hardware platform to the next. Your Wii stuff's going to play on the Wii U. Like, your GameCube stuff could play on the Wii, at least for
they sell all these virtual console games.
If anybody knows what side their bread is buttered on.
Yeah.
And I mean, because they're the Disney of video games, like it's people's warm, fuzzy feelings going back into their childhoods for those characters and stuff that keeps them so successful.
We've just seen this
in their interest to do that.
We've just seen this mass transition to games as service. It's not about games as product, which makes it difficult in the future necessarily. Like if you think about your experience with a game and how much of that was informed by DLC, and it's one of those things of like, even if you have the disc of that game and you have that game system and you have the means of hooking that game system up to a television or a display of some kind, if the server's not there to give you that data to send you the DLC,
or even just like the licensing authentication,
you don't even have it, or the licensing authentication isn't up, then like that stuff is.
Well, look at like Samba de Amigo for the Dreamcast. Like, all those songs are on the disc, but the key files you need were supposed to be downloaded. Through the web browser years ago.
Yeah,
and there are ways around it. I mean, you can find those files on other websites and get them onto a VMU and all that stuff.
I mean, it's a trend that has been kind of slowly creeping. It's just it has ramped up in the past few years here.
People will find a way. That's kind of the thing about all this stuff is hobbyists, like the people that really care about this stuff, will always find some weird way to make it happen. And I'm confident about that, but it's just going to get more and more challenging as time goes on.
The biggest problems arise when the framework to support the game exists outside of your house,
right,
or outside of the thing that's running right in front of you, like
emulating an MMO server. Is
it reasonable
like
to expect that you can like take a copy of WoW and play it 30 or 40 years from now? Like,
but I mean, those are the cases where it's like where games as service is a lot more accepted,
kind of implied.
But it's even
the nature of the product.
I had these thoughts when we went and watched the Matrix online shutdown. It is kind of crazy to sit there and then server goes down and then you can't log back in. Of like, there is almost no way of having that experience again.
It was a really crazy thing, like Auto Assault. Like, it's really quick turnaround from launch to failure. It was just like, what the like. There's still people. I mean, there weren't a lot of them, but it was just this thing is gone now.
But it's sort of like, hey, failed television show. Okay, well, we're not going to get more episodes of that, but there's still that first half season, or
and they'll sell that on DVD.
But you probably didn't pay $50 to access that season, and then
but my point is that it's even crazier. Is that there is like, other than that useless box copy you have, Jeff?
Right.
There's like no trace.
Yeah.
There's no record that game really existed, and what you know.
There's the review I wrote. You can go read that.
Yeah.
That'll be good enough. That'll be better than probably playing Auto Assault, actually.
I mean, there's no permanence even with successful games of that type. Like, look at the hatchet that Blizzard took to the original lands in WoW.
Yeah,
when Cataclysm came out.
Yeah, that game's still on,
and
what that game was, whatever. I mean, with WoW, that's an interesting case because within 2 years, that game in a lot of very significant ways did not resemble the game that had launched.
Yeah.
Just in the revisions that they make over time.
I think one of the depressing parts for me about all this is the games that had additional licenses or games that had things, like it's the thing that would prevent a subscription service from Nintendo from making sense, because I would want that to have everything, warts and all. Just give me the worst games, give me the best games, just give me all of it and let me dig through it like it's a library.
It's just who owns
all the rights to that stuff and who do you have to track down. That's why the Twilight Zone pinball stuff is really interesting, because they're actually trying to track some of that stuff down.
That's why like Capcom can't put out like the Mega Man Legends games on PSN, because the license, like specifically like the way music's a huge issue in a lot of games, and especially in Japan, because the way they handle that is not anything like they handle it over here, and there's not a way to just be like, hey, we license this, can we give it an extension for this digital release? It's like they bend you over a barrel, and so it's just, for Capcom when they do the numbers on something like Mega Man Legends 2, it's like, well, there's just no way for us to feasibly release that, and so that's what drops the hobbyist to go and just do it on their own. But that's just tragic that that's the way it has to happen.
You see it with like DVD sets for TV series. Like you look at The State, or like I was watching episodes of Saturday Night Live from the early 90s over the weekend, and they've just taken a fucking hatchet to that shit with the music licensing, because there's like jokes that don't work anymore because they've had to do this. Like, it's kind of a cross-media thing that I think it's one of those things that people will be more cognizant of in the future when it comes, especially when it comes to movies and stuff like that. Like, they just figure out that licensing stuff ahead of time. And I think this will eventually be less of a problem. But right now, there's an era that is going to kind of be lost because of all that licensing stuff. And that happens with TV stuff, and then also I think with games too.
It's like Tony Hawk HD. It's like half the soundtrack of the original. Same with like the Jet Set remake.
But I think with Tony Hawk, they're not necessarily even trying to get the full soundtrack.
Yeah, they're just getting some stuff.
We want enough stuff for flavor, but these other bands are cheaper.
Yeah.
So.
But the Jet Set soundtrack, they're definitely like cutting a lot of the licensed stuff.
I think there's a lot of the US.
A lot of the licensed stuff was the garbage.
US
Yeah,
stuff. You don't
want
that.
They couldn't get it anyway.
Right.
So
I think a lot of people don't expect, or like when they're making this stuff, they don't.
Crazy Taxi was a fucking tragedy.
Yeah. Don't necessarily expect or anticipate or think that the thing that they're working on deserves or demands that kind of permanence.
Right.
You have plenty of stories that go back way older than games, obviously, of just pieces of media just being they're whatever Pulp Fiction, comic books, stuff that's like, oh, this is just, it's visceral, throwaway stuff. You have it while in this moment, but it doesn't necessarily have any value and doesn't necessarily need to be kept for any longer.
Like, only crazy people are keeping archival copies of the 24-hour Human Giant Marathon, but it should be available.
I have that.
I want to get that for you.
All right, we'll talk about it later. We're going to end this podcast, though, first. Thanks, everyone who wrote in. Bombcast@giantbomb.com.